At 4:17 a.m. local time on March 29, 2026, seismic monitoring stations across the Middle East, Central Asia, and Europe registered a magnitude 4.8 seismic event originating from a point approximately 40 kilometers southeast of the city of Kaman, in the Kavir Desert of central Iran. The United States Geological Survey initially classified it as a natural earthquake. Standard procedure: the USGS receives thousands of seismic events per week. Magnitude 4.8 is notable but not extraordinary. The Comprehensive Nuclear Test Ban Treaty Organization's monitoring network classified it differently within 11 minutes. The waveform signature, the specific pattern of seismic energy propagation through the Earth's crust, was wrong for a natural earthquake. Natural earthquakes generate a characteristic mix of P waves and S waves that reflects the fracture mechanics of rock under tectonic stress. The Kerman event generated a waveform dominated by P waves, with a compression signature consistent with a single, instantaneous point source energy release occurring at shallow depth. The CTBTO signature is not ambiguous. There is one thing that generates a shallow, point source, P-wave-dominated seismic event in the Kavir Desert at 4:17 a.m. Iran just detonated a nuclear device. The yield, based on CTBTO seismic analysis, is estimated at 8 to 12 kilotons. For reference, the bomb dropped on Hiroshima yielded approximately 15 kilotons. The device Iran detonated is smaller. It is also, by every measure that matters, sufficient. Sufficient to destroy a city block. Sufficient to kill tens of thousands of people in a single detonation. Sufficient to trigger the most dangerous proliferation cascade the world has seen since the Soviet Union tested its first nuclear weapon in 1949. In the 77 years since that Soviet test, 8 countries have joined the nuclear club. The process took each of them years, sometimes decades, of painful, expensive, internationally monitored development. The barriers were technical, financial, and political. Iran just cleared all 3 barriers simultaneously, in the middle of a war, while under maximum international sanctions. While its air force was being degraded by Israeli strikes and its economy was absorbing the impact of a Hormuz blockade. If Iran can develop a nuclear weapon under those conditions, the non-proliferation regime, the set of treaties, norms, and institutional arrangements that has prevented nuclear weapons from spreading for 50 years, is not weakened. It is over. To understand what happens in the next 72 hours, you need to understand what Iran actually built and how long this has been coming. Because the 4:17 a.m. detonation was not a surprise to the people who were paying attention. Iran's nuclear program has been the subject of international concern since the early 1990s. The IAEA has been conducting inspections, with varying degrees of access, since 2003. The 2015 Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action placed quantitative limits on Iranian enrichment and monitoring requirements on its facilities. The United States withdrew from the JCPOA in 2018. Iran began systematically exceeding JCPOA limits in 2019. By 2023, IAEA inspectors confirmed that Iran had accumulated sufficient highly enriched uranium, enriched to 84% purity, one step below weapons grade, for multiple nuclear devices, if it chose to convert it. The conversion from highly enriched uranium stockpile to functional nuclear device requires 3 additional steps: metallurgy, converting uranium hexafluoride gas into a metal form suitable for a weapon; machining, shaping the metal into the precise geometry required for a fission chain reaction; and weaponization, integrating the nuclear core with high explosive lenses that compress it to supercriticality on detonation. Western intelligence assessments as recently as January 2026 placed Iran's breakout timeline, the time required to complete those 3 steps, at 3 to 4 weeks. Iran suspended its NPT commitments 12 days ago, following the Israeli strike on Bushehr. 12 days ago, the IAEA inspectors who were monitoring Iran's declared nuclear facilities were asked to leave. The cameras went dark. The seals on centrifuge cascades were broken. And 12 days later, the Kavir Desert registered a magnitude 4.8 seismic event that the CTBTO classified within 11 minutes. 3 to 4 weeks became 12 days. The intelligence assessment was wrong by half. Let me tell you exactly what Iran built. Because the design choice tells you everything about what Iran intends to do with this capability. The yield, 8 to 12 kilotons, and the delivery characteristics inferred from the test geometry are consistent with an implosion-type fission device using highly enriched uranium as its fissile core. This is not a thermonuclear weapon, it is a first-generation fission bomb. The same basic design as the Hiroshima and Nagasaki weapons, refined over 70 years of publicly available physics literature. An 8 to 12 kiloton device is not designed for counterforce targeting. Destroying hardened military facilities requires much larger yields. It is not designed for strategic deterrence against the United States or Russia. Those missions require warheads in the hundreds of kilotons range. An 8 to 12 kiloton device is designed for one specific mission, threatening a medium-sized city within range of an existing Iranian ballistic missile. Tel Aviv has a population of 460,000 in the city proper, 3.8 million in the greater metropolitan area. It is 1,600 kilometers from Iran's western missile bases. The Shahab-3 ballistic missile, which Iran has operated for 20 years, has a range of 300 to 2,000 kilometers and a payload capacity of 750 kilograms to 1,000 kilograms. An implosion-type fission device can be designed to fit within a 750-kilogram warhead. Iran did not test a nuclear device this morning. Iran tested a nuclear warhead for a missile it already has. The combination of the test, the existing missile, and the stated target, Israel has been the explicit subject of Iranian nuclear threat rhetoric for 30 years, produces a deterrence equation that did not exist yesterday and cannot be unbuilt today. If you understand why this changes every other calculation in this conflict and every conflict that follows, subscribe right now. Because what I am about to give you is the cascade that begins in Riyadh and Seoul and Tokyo within 72 hours of this morning's detonation. Let me give you the proliferation mathematics. Saudi Arabia has been the most explicit about its nuclear intentions. Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman stated publicly in 2018, "If Iran develops a nuclear bomb, we will follow suit as soon as possible." That was not a rhetorical statement. It was a policy commitment made on camera, in English, to a Western journalist, for an international audience. Saudi Arabia cannot develop a nuclear weapon indigenously on any timeline that matters. It does not have the enrichment infrastructure, the weapons physics expertise, or the testing range. What it does have is $900 billion in foreign exchange reserves and a 30-year relationship with Pakistan's nuclear establishment that has been described by multiple intelligence services as a bomb-on-the-shelf arrangement. An understanding that Pakistan would provide Saudi Arabia with nuclear weapons in exchange for the financial support Saudi Arabia has provided to Pakistan's nuclear program since the 1970s. Pakistani Prime Minister's office will receive a phone call from Riyadh within 72 hours of this morning's test. The content of that call will determine whether the Middle East has 2 nuclear powers or 3 by the end of April. Turkey is the second immediate proliferation risk. Turkey is a NATO member. NATO's nuclear sharing arrangement provides Turkey with access to approximately 50 American B-61 nuclear gravity bombs stored at Incirlik Air Base. Those weapons are under American control and cannot be used without American authorization. But Turkish President Erdogan has been explicit about Turkey's nuclear ambitions, stating in 2019 that it was unacceptable that Turkey could not have nuclear weapons while others in the region did. A nuclear Iran removes the primary political obstacle to Turkish nuclear pursuit, the argument that regional nuclear weapons create instability. That argument is now moot. The instability is here. Egypt, the UAE, and South Korea are the third tier of proliferation risk. Countries with advanced nuclear infrastructure, civilian nuclear programs, and political leadership that will be conducting urgent classified reviews of their nuclear options within the next 48 hours. The Non-Proliferation Treaty currently has 191 member states, every one of them signed based on an implicit guarantee that the 5 recognized nuclear weapons states would maintain their monopoly and provide security guarantees sufficient to make nuclear weapons unnecessary for everyone else. That guarantee just failed in the Kavir Desert at 4:17 a.m. The NPT does not have an enforcement mechanism for a state that withdraws and tests. Article X of the NPT allows any state to withdraw on 90 days' notice if extraordinary events have jeopardized its supreme interests. Iran provided that notice 12 days ago. The legal process was followed. The treaty was respected, technically, right up until the moment it was rendered irrelevant. Now let me tell you what Washington is saying, and where the statement ends and the abyss begins. The president addressed the nation at 6 a.m. Eastern Time, confirming the CTBTO assessment and describing the Iranian test as a grave threat to regional and global security, and a fundamental violation of Iran's international commitments. The statement promised the most severe consequences in coordination with our allies and partners. The Secretary of State convened emergency calls with the UN Secretary General, the NATO Secretary General, the EU High Representative, and the leaders of France, the United Kingdom, and Germany. The UN Security Council convened an emergency session. The draft resolution condemning the test and demanding Iran return to NPT compliance was vetoed by Russia and China within 40 minutes. Here is what none of those responses address. The device has been tested. The physics works. The fissile material exists. Iran's declared stockpile of highly enriched uranium, before the IAEA cameras went dark, was sufficient for 6 to 8 weapons. One has been tested. 5 to 7 remain in various states of assembly, in facilities that are no longer under any international monitoring. Sanctions cannot untest a nuclear weapon. Diplomatic condemnation cannot unenrich uranium. Security Council resolutions cannot remove fissile material that is already in metal form, already machined, already integrated with delivery systems that have 20 years of operational history. The only option that could physically remove Iran's nuclear capability is a military strike on the facilities where the remaining devices are stored and assembled. That option has 3 problems that make it nearly impossible to execute responsibly. First, the locations. Before the IAEA cameras went dark 12 days ago, Iran's known nuclear sites included Natanz, Fordow, Isfahan, and Arak. Fordow is buried under 80 meters of granite mountain, beyond the penetration capability of any conventional American or Israeli munition currently in inventory. The GBU-57 Massive Ordnance Penetrator, the largest conventional bunker buster in the American arsenal, can penetrate approximately 60 meters of reinforced concrete. Fordow is not reinforced concrete. It is granite. 60 meters of penetration capability against 80 meters of granite is a miss. Second, the dispersal. 12 days of operation without IAEA monitoring means 12 days of potential movement of fissile material to locations that are not on any target list. A nuclear strike package that destroys every known facility and misses one dispersal site containing sufficient material for one weapon has not solved the problem. It has created a furious nuclear-armed adversary with a remaining device and no constraint on using it. Third, the deterrence that just came into existence. Iran now has, at minimum, 5 to 7 functional nuclear devices in various states of assembly. Any military strike on Iranian territory, conventional or otherwise, now carries the risk of Iranian nuclear retaliation. That risk may be assessed as low. It is not zero. And decision-makers who must authorize strikes that carry non-zero nuclear retaliation and risk operate in a fundamentally different decision space than they did yesterday. Here are the 3 scenarios for the next 30 days. All of them change the world. Scenario 1. Israel accepts Iranian nuclear deterrence. Ceasefire negotiations begin within 72 hours, mediated by parties acceptable to both sides. Iran agrees to a verified freeze on further nuclear testing and weaponization in exchange for a halt to Israeli strikes on Iranian territory and a pathway to sanctions relief. In this scenario, Iran achieves everything it has sought for 40 years: recognition as a de facto nuclear power, end to the military pressure that has been destroying its infrastructure, and a sanctions relief pathway that will rebuild its economy. The price: a frozen conflict in which Israel lives permanently under Iranian nuclear threat, and Saudi Arabia begins the process of acquiring Pakistani weapons. Scenario 2. Israel strikes Iran's nuclear facilities immediately, accepting the risk of Iranian conventional retaliation and the possibility that some dispersed material is not destroyed. The United States supports the strikes or conducts them directly. In this scenario, Fordow survives. The dispersed material survives. Iran retaliates with every conventional missile remaining in its inventory. hundreds of strikes on Israeli cities, American bases, and Gulf infrastructure simultaneously. Oil prices reach $250 per barrel. The global economy enters recession. And Iran, having survived the strike with its nuclear program partially intact, rebuilds with the explicit lesson that nuclear weapons are the only reliable deterrent against American-Israeli military action. Scenario 3. The non-proliferation regime collapses in sequence. Saudi Arabia receives Pakistani weapons within 30 days. Turkey announces a nuclear review within 60 days. Egypt accelerates its civilian nuclear program with weapons-latent characteristics. The Middle East, which has been nuclear-free since Israel's undeclared program began in the 1960s, becomes a region with 4 to 5 nuclear-armed states within 5 years. In this scenario, every crisis in the region, and the Middle East generates crises with reliable frequency, occurs in the shadow of nuclear arsenals held by governments with varying degrees of institutional stability, command and control maturity, and conflict management experience. Nuclear deterrence in Europe was stable for 50 years because the two primary nuclear powers had professional military establishments, secure second strike capabilities, hotlines, and decades of arms control experience. The Middle East has none of those stabilizing features. What it has is ethnic, religious, and territorial conflicts that have been ongoing for centuries, now overlaid with nuclear weapons held by governments that have been in power for between 2 and 40 years. Here is what you need to understand as we close. At 4:17 a.m. this morning, the world that existed yesterday ended. Not metaphorically. Structurally, the non-proliferation architecture that has prevented nuclear weapons from spreading for 50 years was built on the assumption that determined pursuit of nuclear weapons would be detected, sanctioned, and stopped before it succeeded. Iran was detected. Iran was sanctioned. Iran was not stopped. The assumption failed, and assumptions that fail in nuclear policy do not fail quietly. They fail with a magnitude 4.8 seismic event in the Kavir Desert that seismographs in 47 countries registered simultaneously. 8 to 12 kilotons, 1 device tested, 5 to 7 remaining, Fordow intact. Saudi Arabia making a phone call to Islamabad. The NPT with 191 members, none of whom can explain why the guarantee they signed up for still holds. And a decision that every government in the world now has to make. In a region with a nuclear-armed Iran, what does your security require that it did not require yesterday? Share this video. Because the coverage will show you the seismic waveform and the CTBTO confirmation and the Security Council session and the government statements about grave threats and severe consequences. It will not tell you that Fordow cannot be destroyed with any conventional munition in the American arsenal. It will not explain the Saudi-Pakistani bomb-on-the-shelf arrangement. It will not map the proliferation sequence that begins in Riyadh within 72 hours. They will give you the version where international institutions respond, and the crisis is managed, and the world pulls back from the edge. I just gave you the version where the edge just moved, permanently, in the Kavir Desert, at 4:17 a.m., 8 to 12 kilotons, 47 seismographs, 77 years of nuclear order. Ended before breakfast.